Hey everyone, it's Samuel. And welcome to Plot Hooks, the podcast where we explore the arts of narrative and collaborative storytelling in the world's premier RPG, Dungeons & Dragons. Today in the Prime Material, Devils. In the Wilds, the Pit Fiend. And in the Tavern, what would you do if there was a devil that defected? Hey everyone! I hope everybody is having an excellent day. Excited to return to Spooky Month here at Plot Hooks with you all by looking at the devilish fiends of the Nine Hells today, and 5 aspects of their lore which you can use in a story. Before we get into the Prime Material though, a few announcements to get out of the way. Remember, as always, to follow us on social media, especially right now on Twitter, as we're only about 40 followers away from our next milestone on the quest for 1K. When we hit 700, we're giving away that massive package of dice from Greenleaf Geek and the spell tracker from Arcane Spectacles and the dice tray custom made by Games by B. So be sure to follow us there and find that post and like and retweet it to be entered to win that awesome giveaway package. Be sure, whenever you're listening to the podcast as well, to rate and review it on whichever podcast platform you happen to be listening on. It helps spread the word about Plot Hooks to more and more people. Be sure to be checking out Plot Hooks Adventures every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Currently in the midst of an awesome adventure featuring a bunch of rambunctious kids traversing through the horrendous war wastes in order to retrieve something for one of their friends. It's a very wholesome and awesome narrative. And finally, it would be awesome of you if you could support us on Patreon. There's lots of content up there for you, including homebrew stuff and the chance to impact this show and Plot Hooks Adventures, and even appear on Plot Hooks Adventures at our $15 tier. We genuinely appreciate your support. It helps us be able to continue running all of these things, and we genuinely appreciate each and every one of you. And even those of you that just listen, we really appreciate you too. Thanks to everyone for being a part of the Plot Hooks family. But without further ado, let's get on to talking about the devils. Now, there's a ton out there, particularly in the devil section of the monster manual. There's some information in things like the Nine Hells section of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes has a big write-up on the Blood War. And of course, Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus has a big diabolic component as you're actually traversing that first layer of the Nine Hells as well. So there's tons of stuff out there that's been written on this particular topic, and there is a certain amount of this episode which is going to have a lore dump component, but what we really want to do is highlight 5 aspects of the canonical lore for Dungeons & Dragons Devils and see how we can use them to tell an awesome story. So, broad picture first off. Devils are natives of the Nine Hells of Beator, generally just referred to as the Nine Hells. In Dungeons & Dragons, they serve as sort of the embodied force of the lawful evil alignment, the alignment of that particular outer plane in the Nine Hells. They're driven by ideals of tyranny, oppression, enslavement, totalitarianism, subjugation. These are the concepts which drive their forces and what they desire to see for the entire cosmos, with them at the helm of all the tyranny and oppression, of course. And this is in stark contrast to the demonic forces of the multiverse, the demons of the infinite layers of the abyss, an evil force which desires destruction and chaos. The evil of the devils seeks not total destruction like the demons do, but they seek total domination. And with this love of power and tyranny, as you might expect, devils have a very rigid and ordered hierarchy. Not because devils of a lower rank respect those in authority over them necessarily, but because the order and the structure of the nine hells rewards obedience. However, they do have an extreme lust for power and ambition, and they'll do whatever they can to gain a promotion in order to better satisfy their own desires within this ordered hierarchy. And this gets us into the first aspect of devils, which is excellent to use in a story, that aspect of promotion. And within this ordered hierarchy, there are several tiers which a devilish fiend can find themselves on the proverbial ladder of devil authority. The bottom one is the lemures. They're the baseline devil. They're what evil, corrupted souls that are banished to the nine hells start out as. They're disgusting, mostly formless blobs of flesh that look like they're always in absolute agony. They're just absolute baseline devils. One tier up from that are the lesser devils. These are things like imps, chain devils, barred devils, bearded devils, and that level of fiend. One step even further are the greater devils, where you find pit fiends, which we'll talk about later, ice devils, horn devils, and devils of those varieties. One step higher still are the archdevils, and there are 9 of these, each ruling one of the layers of the 9 hells on layers 1 through 8. Zariel, Despater, Memon, Belial, and Fierna co-ruling the 4th layer, Levistus, Glazia, Beelzebul, and Mephistopheles are all of the archdevil variety. And finally, the highest ranking member of the devilish hierarchy is Asmodeus himself, who rules the 9th layer of the 9 hells. His power has varied based on the edition, but in 5th edition, he has the power of a lesser god. And as far as promotion is concerned, devils, as they're in this hierarchy, swear fealty to a particular devil in authority over it, because no promotion or demotion can take place unless this happens. That way, rival devils can't just demote the devils that serve the other and just fight each other in that manner. Promotion and demotion can only take place by devils in authority over another devil. Typically speaking, when talking about promoting from a lemure up to a lesser devil, that just happens whenever a high-ranking devil needs another warm body to serve. But above that, promotion and demotion is based off of merit. If a devil is obedient and serves well, then it could be promoted. And if it disobeys or serves poorly, it could be demoted. And this promotion aspect can play a really cool role in a story. When you're talking about developing a villain for a campaign and you're thinking that you might want it to be a fiend, you're thinking you might want it to be a devil, well, one potential motivation that this particular entity could have is that they're desperate to complete a task for their boss. And this could go whether or not it's any level of fiend. Unless they're fighting Asmodeus himself, there is some devil that is in authority over them. And as the party is coming into contact with them, they might be desperate to complete a task for their boss. They might be seeking to get a promotion, or they might just be desperately trying to avoid failing to keep themselves from being demoted. And this is a great background aspect to have for a villain in your story. Players don't have to interact with it. If they never figure it out, then it still an awesome story with this villain trying to accomplish whatever he wanted to accomplish with. But if the players do manage to uncover this hidden motivation, this provides a whole nother layer of actually trying to attack their problems. Maybe they try to embarrass the devil, not even trying to beat it in combat, but just try to make sure that it's obvious to their boss that they're failing and get this entity out of their hair that way. It could add a whole new aspect to the role-playing and can be a great narrative asset. And I like assets like that generally, where it could be a really cool thing if the players uncover it, but if they don't, it's not that big of a deal. It's not going to negatively affect the story or make it feel empty because they didn't uncover this plot thread that you had. So promotion is the first aspect that we wanted to cover. The second is corruption. Within this love of power and oppression that we've talked about, there's a big desire to corrupt the souls of mortals. Devils want to create slaves to their will, both to further spread their diabolical schemes and to just enjoy the fact that they have other life forms bent to their desires. And devils are fully aware of the faults of mortals, and they patiently tug at the flaws and weak points in order to drive individuals down dark paths. And while anyone is susceptible to these attacks, devils especially enjoy going after individuals in some form of power or authority. The more, the better. Because corrupting these individuals, from benevolent leaders to those who wield whatever level of authority they have in a tyrannical manner, is just chef's kiss to a devil. Because whether it's just a boss or whether it's a king, if they can make that person in authority into a tyrant, into a dictator, into just a terrible, oppressive person, and they just oppress their subjects through them, or they do the same thing just to their employees, creating some sort of totalitarian environment, that's just the bee's knees for a devil. That devil that is behind that influence has created this tyrannical state with himself as kind of the secret head, and that just plays right into their love of oppression and power. And this could be used, again, as a great aspect to a story. This could be small scale or large scale. You could have a lower level devil trying to corrupt a particular boss or leader of a guild or mayor or something that the party is interacting with in levels 5 and 6, somewhere low down. And then you could have, as they get into more of a Heroes of the Realm type stage, they can actually be corrupting the leaders of kingdoms. And the party is interacting with these particular leaders, and perhaps they're discovering this corruption ahead of time, or maybe they don't discover the corruption soon enough, and all of a sudden all these strange things are happening, and this person that they feel like they've known for a long time is not acting the same way anymore, and now they have to get to the bottom of it. And having this corrupting force behind this entity is a really interesting way to play up a villain, because you can go through an arc where they actually defeat what they think is the villain, and they realize that the real villain is still out there, because what they defeated was just a corrupted soul. They didn't defeat the corruptor itself. And even if they kill the particular devil in question, the devil will just go back to the 9 hells and reform, unless they happen to kill it on its home plane. So it provides a little bit of a plot twist element there, or a mystery element, as they're trying to unravel exactly why this is happening. The corruption aspect is a great facet to play with. Thirdly, there's the true name aspect. Devils, again, all about oppression and domination. And as such, for obvious reasons, they hate to be oppressed and dominated themselves. And being bound into service to a mortal is one of the least favorite things that these fiends can experience. The only devil which actually doesn't mind being summoned and controlled are imps. And even in that case, they still like to try to corrupt those who summon them, even though they don't mind being familiars. But other than imps, it is absolutely something that every devil wants to avoid. They do not want to be controlled by a mortal. And one of the key components to binding a devil into service is the use of that devil's true name. Every devil that isn't a lemure has one. And if a humanoid discovers it, it can be used as part of a summoning ritual in order to draw the entity out of the nine hells and subjugate them. And there's also artifacts, which are referred to as talismans, magic items that are created using the true name of the devil and then enchanted through a terrible ritual. And these artifacts can also be used to bind devils into a humanoid service. So for obvious reasons then, devils keep these true names quite close to the chest. They won't reveal this key truth willingly. However, they can be forced to reveal the name via something like a charm effect, or the name could be discovered. There are ancient books, for instance, like the Book of Vile Darkness, which could include the names of certain devils of interest. Or the party could come across a talisman with a devil's true name on it. So there's a few different aspects that true names can still be discovered. And this is an interesting point for a story. Not so much in terms of actually wanting to summon one and bind one to your party's service, but again, thinking about a great villain, especially here during Spooky Month, where you want to use a devil as your particular antagonist. What if this devil was just too powerful for the party to beat? Well, this is, like we talked a few weeks ago about fatal flaws in our monsters. This is a fatal flaw. This is a nugget that you can place inside of the narrative where they have a method of recourse against this really powerful foe. So the discovery of a true name could be a big plot point on the path to defeating a devilish villain. Fourthly, we have contracts. Devils love contracts. This goes back to their lawful evil part of them. They love to make deals or bargains with evil humanoids who are trying to gain something. And they try really hard to negotiate their way into something which is going to work out in their particular favor. And if a creature breaks the contract, then instantly their soul is forfeited, and it is taken away to the nine hells where they become a lemure. The classic trope of this is just a mortal wanting supreme power, and they make a deal with a devil and sell their soul quite literally, where, they agree to lose their soul after their life, but they gain tremendous power in the meantime. That's kind of the classic trope. But it doesn't have to be that black and white. Perhaps there's a contract where the devil siphons off a few years of a particular entity's life. Get creative with it. And heck, that's a cool handout idea to do for your party as well. That's something you could just give to your party. Here's this contract, and they have to actually read through it and figure out if there's anything in the wording that is going to really mess them up if they are trying to figure out if they want to make a deal with this evil entity. I also love this for NPCs, perhaps past villains who maybe even have already been defeated by the party, and all of a sudden they show back up and they're stronger. Come to find out they made a contract with a particular entity. And now not only are they the same bad villain as before, but now they're being corrupted and they've got a devil at their back. Could be a really interesting twist in a campaign. So we've got the promotion aspect, corruption, the true names, contracts, and finally, the blood war. The blood war refers to the ever-raging conflict that exists between the devils and the demonic hordes of the abyss. And you can find a huge write-up on this in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, and you can even be a part of it in Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus. But this is just a massive war between the devils, who are outnumbered but much more powerful individually, and the massive hordes of destructive entities of the demons. Most of the war tends to happen on Avernus, that top layer of the Nine Hells, where the demons come over via the river Styx, an interplanar river that flows throughout the lower planes. And they come over and just try to destroy the devils. And this war has raged for as long as recorded history has gone on. And good entities don't stop this because they are perfectly comfortable to let devils and demons fight each other. But while this is the primary battleground, it's not the only one. And this war can pop up across the multiverse. And I personally really enjoy telling a story where the party is interacting with a war which they're not a fan of both sides of, where they come into it as innocent bystanders, but all of a sudden this thing is happening which is destroying their home or in some ways altering their particular existence, and they are trying to figure out a way that they can stop this horror. They got to figure out a way to stop these hordes. And of course, in this case, ideally, this would happen by not allowing either side to gain any sort of major victory, but hopefully by defeating both sides. But there can be some interesting quandaries that you put to the party in this particular scenario. And devils, to me, are the much more interesting side because, again, the demons are much more chaotic. They're just a ton of them and power, and they're just a ton of them, and they just want to destroy, whereas the devils can be much more calculating. Not that the demons are not, but the devils, to me, are more so. I can imagine much easier a scenario where the party actually interacts with the devilish side in order to gain something than I can for the demonic side. And this doesn't have to be a big overarching campaign arc either. If you just want a horror narrative for this season, hey, how about just next session? All of a sudden, out of a portal, out walks a battle of devils and demons. The party just has to figure out what's happening and how to stop it. And it's just a one-session combat encounter, or role-playing encounter, I suppose, if the right rolls are made. And you can have this really interesting scenario based off of the Blood War. So these 5 aspects, promotion, corruption, true names, contracts, and the Blood War, are just 5 of the things about the lore for devils which have been built out in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, which we can use to create good stories with, and good horror stories to boot. So how have you used them in your games? How do you want to use them in your games? Are you using any this Halloween season? Contact us on social media. We'd love to hear your stories. But I think for now, about time for us to head over to the wilds and look at the pit fiend. We're out here in the wilds. Today we're talking about the most powerful devils that aren't archdevils or Asmodeus himself, and those are pit fiends. These often report directly to the archdukes and archduchesses, the rulers of the different layers of the nine hells, and they are the generals and the leaders of all other devils. They're those who you will see commanding hordes in the Blood War, for instance. And for everything that we've talked about the love of power and the love of tyranny, well, that, as they've climbed up through the ladder, once you get to Pit Fiend, that's just exacerbated all the more. Reading directly out of the monster manual, it states, with an inflated sense of superiority and entitlement, Pit Fiends form a grotesque aristocracy in the infernal realm. These domineering and manipulative tyrants conspire to eliminate anything that stands between them and their desires, even as they negotiate the convoluted and dangerous politics of the Nine Hells. Past that, there's not too many specific lore elements to the Pit Fiend. And it gives us as dungeon masters a lot of freedom as we're creating, because you can make this into a general, you can make it into perhaps a guild leader in the city of Dis. However you want to fill out this grotesque aristocracy, as it says, is totally up to you. So they can be really interesting, powerful villains, especially whenever the party is not quite up to the challenge ratings of the archdevils, like fighting Zariel or something like that. They are still quite strong, though, at a challenge rating 20. They're large fiends, lawful evil, of course, with an AC of 19 and 300 hit points. They've got a 30-foot speed, but a 60-foot flying speed, so you're not running away from these very easy. They're immune to fire and poison and resistant to cold, like most other devils, in addition to being resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing that's not made from a magical weapon, unless that weapon happens to be silvered, but that doesn't come up very much. They have advantage on saving throws against magical effects. They do have a 120-foot true sight, so even with a low passive perception for that CR, that does aid them as they're trying to perhaps scope out invisible party members. And they also have a fear aura, which essentially states that anything within 20 feet of it, as long as the fiend isn't incapacitated, has to make a DC 21 wisdom saving throw or become frightened until the start of their next turn. Once they make the save, they're immune to the aura again for the next 24 hours, but that's still an interesting thing to play up when you're actually talking about a combat encounter with these things. So with both the true sight and the fear aura, I like the idea of having a particular encounter where they're perhaps trying to get around a pit fiend that's guarding a particular place, and they have to go through a narrow passageway, and they have to figure out a way to get past this pit fiend that's got both true sight and this fear aura, so anytime they get close, they all of a sudden have to deal with becoming frightened. That could be a real challenge and lead to some creative thinking for a party trying to get around the scenario. Other than that, though, there's not too much special about the Pit Fiend's stat block. They just hit really hard. They can cast Fireball and detect magic at will. They've got Wall of Fire and Hold Monster at 3 a day each. The saving throws of all of these spells is a DC 21. They make 4 attacks each round, the most devastating of which is the bite attack, which deals 46 plus 8 piercing damage on a hit, but more notably, if a Constitution saving throw is failed, then the target is poisoned, and while that target is poisoned, they can't regain hit points, and they take 66 poison damage at the start of each of its turns. The saving throw gets made at the end of each of the poison creature's turn, but still, that is a potential for a lot of damage a couple rounds after the actual attack is made. So just with 4 attacks and lots of area of effect magic with the ability to pump fireballs out at will, they're just really strong. Some might be tempted to look at this particular stat block and say, that's pretty boring, it's just a strong creature, there's not too much interesting there. But it's those little details like the true sight and the fear aura, which lead you to create a particular setup for just how the map works, or a particular setup for the combat encounter or the social encounter, which will create this scenario which turns this fight against a really strong enemy into a puzzle. It's a great chance for you to give the party a couple of cues in the environment to figure out in order to help them fight more effectively, or just things which detract away from their ability to be able to fight this creature. And of course, as I mentioned before, you have the aspect of them being just this leading force in devilish society, where they can be NPCs in the city of Dis or something like that. So there's lots of different ways that you can utilize them, especially if you think outside the box. But I think that's about all the time that we have out here in the wilds today. Let's head back to the tavern and get some refreshment. All right, out here in the tavern, today's plot hook: what would you do if there was a devil that defected? Now, this is a little bit of a conceptual plot hook, because an argument might be, can devils really defect? In many ways, they are creatures essentially embodying the lawful evil alignment. So, are they actually capable of leaving that alignment? I would personally say that they are. I don't like the idea, even for the most monstrous of entities, of having a situation where a whole segment of monster is just considered non-redeemable. Perhaps this is a devil that somehow recalls his past life, where now he all of a sudden remembers the contract that he made and how he lost his soul, and now he's trying to atone. And of course, as soon as a devil defects, the big thing with that entire society is if you disobey, you will be demoted and you will suffer the consequences. And if you are demoted all the way to a limeré, you lose your memories that you had whenever you were a higher ranking devil. So that means that the defector would have to work in secret in order to accomplish the particular goals that they want to accomplish. Maybe this entity is secretly interacting with the party as the party is trying to pull the strings, and this entity is working behind the scenes to try to give them a boost, but also trying to figure out a way that they can be free. It can be a really interesting twist on a redemption story just because of the backdrop of devilish society. If this particular entity is seeking to redeem themselves and survive, they will have to go about it very secretively. So it could be a really interesting aspect to add to a narrative. Next time you're interacting with devils in your story, consider throwing a little plot like this in. See how the party reacts to it. I think it would create a really interesting story. But I think that's about all the time we have on this week's episode of Plot Hooks. Thank you all very much for listening. Be sure to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/plothooks. Check out Plot Hooks Adventures. And thanks for listening from all of us here at Plot Hooks. Me, Samuel. Thanks from Becca, Matt, Mike, Steve, Dave, Zach, and of course, podcast pupper Ellie. We'll see you all We'll see you all again next week for another episode of Plot Hooks. Stay spooky, my friends. And always remember, everyone can be a storyteller.